Snow fell through the open rafters like sifted ash. The village was gone, flattened in a single morning. Smoke no longer rose, only thin columns of vapor where bodies still breathed. In what had once been a blacksmith's shed, a man crouched beside a buried ember, cupping his hands around the last living warmth. The war had turned the sky itself into an enemy. Plains overhead, cold beneath, hunger within. He listened for movement. None came. Just the wind threading through split timbers, whispering like ghosts. His fingers ached as he pressed a broken tin lid against the ember, trying to trap the heat. The man's name was Janek. He'd been an engineer once, before factories became targets. Now he was only a survivor. A child coughed in the dark corner. Janek looked toward her, a neighbor's daughter wrapped in rags. Her breath fogged the air, vanished, returned. The ember flickered low. For a moment, the shed felt like the end of time itself. No past, no future, only the silence that comes after everything collapses. He pressed his palm against the tin. It was still warm, barely, and that was enough to start again. Cold was not weather. It was a siege. It slipped through cracks, hollowed bone, froze thought before language. Hunger was its twin. One gnawed, the other numbed. Janek understood machines. But cold was something mechanical too. Relentless, efficient, unpitying. Every motion cost heat. Every breath lost more. He'd seen men freeze with tools still clutched in their hands, as if the body refused to believe it had already died. The villagers huddled together in cellars and stables, burning furniture, paper, anything that could catch. But the wood smoked and stung the lungs. The smoke meant light, and light meant death from the sky. So they learned silence. No flame, no signals. The cold hunted what the eye could not see. Janek began to think differently. Heat, he realized, didn't have to come from flame. He scraped his numb fingers against the frost-coated floorboards, listening to the groan of wood. Beneath the ice, there was insulation. There was containment. If he could trap heat, steal it from the air the way the cold stole life, perhaps they could last one more night. Outside, the wind gathered. It moved through the ruined streets like something ancient reclaiming its land. Winter, 1943. The front had shifted east, but ruin lingered where armies had passed. Villages were hollowed to shells, their survivors forgotten between borders. Poland was a wound between empires, and in that wound, people endured. Janek had worked once for the rail lines, designing boilers, valves, systems meant to endure stress. When the trains stopped running, so did the city. The tools of progress became tools of survival. Each night he scavenged. A section of pipe, a cracked brick, a spool of wire. The war had stripped everything but the will to adapt. He kept sketches in a torn ledger, diagrams of small miracles. A stove made from a milk can, a filter of snow and charcoal, a harness for carrying heat stones against the chest. He wasn't building comfort. He was buying time. The villagers began to whisper his name when the wind bit hardest. He didn't seek thanks. What he built was ugly, improvised, temporary. But it worked. Every design came from failure. Every mistake, a lesson written in frostbite. Somewhere deep inside, the old engineer returned, not for glory, but for the fragile continuation of breath. They buried 2 that week, one from hunger, one from the cold. The earth was too hard to dig deep, so Janek used rubble from a collapsed wall to seal the graves. He noticed the warmth of the stones under his hands, stored from the sun hours before. That night, he built his first tool, a box of brick, mud, and memory. He called it nothing. It was barely a form, just an opening for air, a sealed path for smoke. He laid tin scraps inside a layer of ash, then kindling so small it looked like dust. When he lit it, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the draft caught. The smoke drew inward, not out. The flame disappeared from view, but the walls began to glow faintly red. No smoke escaped, only heat. The girl crept closer, hands extended. For the first time in days, the air moved. Not biting, but breathing. They slept that night near the box. Yannick woke several times, afraid it had died out. It hadn't. It pulsed softly beneath its shell, like a buried heart. The others began to copy it the next morning. They called it the silent fire. Word spread through the valley. A fire that gave warmth but no smoke, no light to betray you, an invisible miracle. The secret was simple physics. Heat, trapped and cycled, burned longer. The bricks stored it. The ash insulated it. The draft fed it just enough air to stay alive. A stove built by memory and instinct, older than the war itself. They dug them into the ground, sealed them with clay, fed them with scraps of peat and bone. The stoves became hearts of every cellar, every shelter. For Yannick, it was no longer about the stove. It was about what it meant. That the human mind could still think in a place meant only for survival. That ingenuity was defiance. One evening, he found the girl watching the faint glow in silence. Her eyes reflected the red pulse through the cracks. She whispered one word, alive. And Yannick, who had not prayed in years, nodded as though she had spoken a truth older than faith. Outside, the wind howled unanswered. The silent stoves changed everything. Where once they huddled motionless, villagers now moved, spoke, planned. Warmth gave them time, and time gave them thought. They began to cook again. Root broth, melted snow, boiled bark. The children stopped shivering long enough to dream. Even their hands, cracked and raw, learned to work again, shaping clay, bending wire, mending boots. Yannick showed them how to ration airflow, how to build the draft from 2 tunnels, how to trap heat with stones. He spoke in diagrams, not words, drawing lines in the frost on the floor. Soon, other engineers appeared, farmers, smiths, mothers, each improving the design. One built a chimney shielded by snowbanks. Another found that soot mixed, with clay-sealed cracks better than mortar. None of them called it invention. They called it keeping warm. By spring, their valley had outlasted entire towns. Better supplied, but less adaptable, the silent fire became a teacher. It reminded them that survival was not about what you had, but what you understood. And it burned, quiet, steadfast, invisible, against the hunger of the wind. When the war moved west, soldiers stumbled upon the stoves left behind. Compact, efficient, smokeless. They copied them in trenches and outposts. Manuals recorded them as field-efficient combustion units. Historians never knew their origin, but the knowledge traveled faster than armies. In the mountains of Italy, in the ruins of Manila, in Siberian camps, people rediscovered the same principle. Heat contained as life extended. Even after peace, the silent fire lingered. Refugees built them in displaced person camps. Mountaineers adapted them for expeditions. Homesteaders used the same air channel designs in modern rocket stoves. Yannick never saw any of that. When the front passed again, he vanished into its tide. His notebook, the one with the sketches, survived in a barn wall. Years later, a young engineer found it. Pages warped from moisture, ink blurred but lines clear. He recognized not just the mechanics, but the humility in them. The idea that survival isn't an act of strength, but of listening. To physics, to nature, to necessity. The war had ended. The lesson had not. The stove's genius was in its paradox. A fire hidden from sight yet fully alive. It inverted the logic of survival. Less oxygen, less waste, more life. Modern engineers would call it secondary combustion efficiency. Ingenuity had called it common sense. In truth, it was thermodynamics shaped by desperation. Preheat the air, burn the gases twice, store the energy. The ancient equation between fuel and breath. But beyond the physics lay a philosophy. The villagers had learned that excess was dangerous. Noise fatal, waste unforgivable. They became minimalists long before the word existed. In that frozen world, survival meant reducing everything to what worked, and nothing more. Even now, the same principle guides those who prepare, who build bug-out bags and shelters, who imagine collapse through the lens of gear. But what Yannick built required no gear, only understanding. The silent stove wasn't just a tool. It was a conversation with nature, a truce. Because true survival doesn't conquer the environment, it cooperates with it. And sometimes, the smartest flame is the one that hides its light. 80 years later, the world is louder, brighter, colder in other ways. We pack survival kits filled with gadgets, solar panels, filters, and blades. Yet, when the grid fails, when silence returns, we reach for the same truth they did in 1943, that warmth isn't stored in technology. It's stored in knowledge. A single candle can outlast a dozen. Batteries if you understand airflow. A stone wall holds the sun longer than steel. And a community that shares heat will always survive longer than one that hoards it. In museums, the tools of that forgotten village sit unnamed. Bricks fused with soot. Tins warped by heat. To most, they are artifacts. To the few who look closely, they are blueprints of human persistence. The silent fire still burns in principle, if not in sight. Every minimalist shelter, every efficient stove, every survivalist blog traces its lineage back to that unrecorded act of ingenuity. They didn't call it prepping. They called it living. Snow falls again, different century, same rhythm. Somewhere, a modern camper lights a small, efficient stove, watching its flame disappear beneath a ceramic shell. He feels its warmth and never wonders whose hands first thought of hiding fire. But in that invisible glow, history lingers. Jonek's design was lost to time, yet its lesson endures. That survival is not about firepower, but fire wisdom. The quiet mastery of using less, knowing more, enduring longer. The war ended, the ruins healed, but the principle outlasted both. Make warmth from scarcity, silence from danger, hope from ash. If you listen closely on a cold night, the wind still carries that lesson, the whisper of a mind that refused to freeze, and in the dark, the ember still breathes, unseen yet alive, because they never lit a fire to be seen, they lit one to survive.